The Digital Bias Paradox. Welcome to the ninth episode of Critically Realistic. In this podcast, we are searching to address controversial issues that affect our life and society. If you are sensible or getting offended easily, please stop the video and go back to your comfort zone. If not, please consider to like and subscribe. By doing so, you are helping us promote open conversation in a time of social crisis. In this conversation, I will present what I call the digital bias paradox. This concept is affecting our lives both on individual and social levels. I define it as the beliefs formed and held by people that consciously or unconsciously prioritize information obtained from social media, regardless of the lack of evidence or clear contradictions they observe in their actual physical day-to-day life. People immersed in this bias will try to impose their beliefs on society to resolve the dissonance emerging from this paradox, usually justifying their set of beliefs on how they feel or how they think the world ought to be. We are living in unprecedented times. One of the most important developments of our age is the development of technology. While it has many positive aspects as a tool we can use, like any other tool, we should be aware of its negative aspects. Social media is one of those. It allows us to connect to people worldwide while being exposed to a stream of information like never before. Social media has two different aspects, the social part and the information part. In its early days, Facebook allowed people to stay in contact and share their lives with people they did not have the time or capacity to meet. Over time, and with the development of the platforms and their algorithms, our feeds have evolved to be much more than that. It became a new channel to absorb the news and shape our worldview. Humans are living in a simulation, not the one presented in the Matrix, in which we are all sleeping in a water container, dreaming of an alternative reality and waiting to wake up, but a simulation in the sense that we see only what we are trained and can see. The human experience is highly selective. Out of the endless information that reaches our senses, we filter most of it and concentrate on a tiny part. It is part of the human existence. We are built this way. It is not a matter of our wish, but a limitation of our capacity. This mechanism is a reinforcing loop. We see what we search for, and that creates ideas in our head that guide us to look for more information of the same type. Over time, it makes a worldview that unconsciously guides our senses toward a certain reality, which, over time, creates what we call our belief system. This is a known process that takes a lot of energy from us. In many cases, and especially when tired, we prefer to lean on trustworthy sources. In ancient times, it was the oracles, or our leading figures. With the development of monotheism, it became the priest and the Bible. Recently, it became the expert. Advertisers know this and take advantage of it, hitting the soft spots that allow them to manipulate our thoughts into buying whatever they are selling. Social media has taken a new role in our lives. It replaced, in many cases, the experts and the legacy media. This development is due in many to the loss of trust in our government and authority, while lacking true and admirable figures to follow in the older generation. Many young people have shifted and consumed most of their information from social media, putting aside the clear effect it has on the capacity of young people to focus or read in-depth articles. One of the most important effects of the deployment of social media and the way we consume it is the importance this tool has in shaping the way we see the world. To truly understand how and why, we must get familiar with a concept called recency bias. In simple terms, recency bias is the tendency to place too much emphasis on experiences that are freshest in your memory, even if they are not the most relevant or reliable. This is one of the most important aspects of the change we see around us, and in my opinion, the main reason for most of the social and psychological chaos we all experience. The algorithm running social media aims for one simple thing: to make you stay longer on the platform, like and comment as much as possible. As it requires excitement, the algorithm will lean toward showing us extreme cases of negative information. It is not the algorithm, it is us. As humans, we are more attracted to negative news and outrageous topics. After all, if everything is good and normal, it is not really interesting. We can ponder this issue and try to understand why, which is an important question, but one that is irrelevant to our current conversation. Eventually, social media evolved to be more of a tool for media than any tool for socialization. It is there to show us two things. First, it reinforces what we already believe in by showing us more data to make us feel nice. And second, it enrages us by showing us data that will make us protest and be angry. As time passes, social media and phones have become our main source of worldview creation tools. After all, for most people, real life in their house, social area, and city is less exciting, less accepting, and in many cases, just boring. It is not a bug of our current way of life. It is an important part of human existence. Boringness is a sign of security. It is a characteristic of leisure. Free time and peace are needed for philosophy and personal development, and most importantly, they motivate to improve. As we all plunge into social media and make it our main point of reference and self-worth, a few interesting things seem to happen to us. First, we become dopamine addicts who cannot control ourselves. It is an addiction like any other. Secondly, it promotes depression. This happened for two reasons: the fact that we become more isolated and the unrealistic role models we are exposed to. Thirdly, and the most relevant point to our conversation, it promotes anxiety and hate. It is fundamental to understand why this happened, as I believe it is one of the most unlooked aspects of social media. The short answer to it is this: it exposes us to the worst of human experience all at once and reinforces the notion that the world is a bad place and that there is nothing we can do about it. Additionally, the most outrageous ideas are the most popular, as the algorithm sees any negative comment as a reaction to push the post forward. I believe a few examples are needed if we are to fully understand this point. I had the chance to have a fascinating conversation recently with an intelligent woman I hold in high regard. In this conversation, I've been explained that men are toxic and dangerous. When I asked, based on what data these statements are reinforced, the woman in question pointed out that in Italy, while all crimes are in decline, the homicide of women by men is steadily rising. Since it is data we are discussing, I checked this claim rapidly and discovered she was right. As I admitted the validity of her point, the validation gave my lovely friend a backwind and a sense of rightfulness. Although there is no doubt homicide is evil, and especially the one of women, I noticed a very interesting thing in the data. The total amount of women killed by men is indeed rising, but it is under 200 a year. When pointing this point out, I noticed a dissonance in my friend's eyes as she understood I had something to say that would contradict her point. Her immediate reaction was to double down on her worldview. She explained to me that men need to be stopped and put on a leash, and they are all violent and see women as their personal possessions. A claim I found to be unreasonably wrong. After listening to her, I decided to raise an obvious point. In Italy, there are currently around 57 million people, of which around 50% are men. If we consider that 2/3 of these men are above 16 years old, the number is higher. That makes around 20 million potential violent murderers. At this point, I concluded that even if the total number of men killing women would be 200, that represents 0.001% of the male population. This dry statistic put my friend in a difficult position, as she started to understand where I was going with it. Her main problem and the reason for the rising dissonance in her head can be easily understood. In many ways, it is a clear example of the digital bias paradox. In her existence, and thanks to social media trends, her framing on the topic was completely different. After all, if 200 women are killed a year each on a different day, it would feel like men are killing women almost every day. A notion that could be terrifying for any woman. On many levels, it should make women worried, and it is a subject that must be addressed. The reason I pointed out this data is not to argue that we should take lightly violence toward women. My motives were in no way aimed toward defending these terrible men who probably see women as their property. The purpose of my point was simple. Regardless of how it feels, the conclusion deducted from her social media experience is wrong and very troubling. The reason this conversation troubled me to that extent was that my friend truly believed with all her heart that men are toxic, violent, and possessive based on 0.001% of men's actions. The fact was completely hidden from her. Practically, she condemned 99.99% of men as monsters without any justification. Additionally, if taking into account that 1.5% of the population are considered to be psychopaths, the fact that such a small number of them actually act upon it can be seen as a real reason for optimism. My point here is neither to show ignorance nor to attack women. I can truly understand how the structure of social media built over time a twisted reality in my friend's head. Unfortunately for her, for me, and all men out there. Her conclusion is logical if considering the simulation she was forced into. Another example of the tragic effect of the digital bias paradox can be seen in all that has to do with global warming. The state of natural disaster is another fantastic example of the social media bias I encountered in recent years. To make it simple, it can be seen by the perception that people have about the number of natural disasters and its related deaths. It is easy to understand how some people can hold the view that both has increased drastically in recent years. It works on the same principle mentioned above. As we are now exposed to all the natural disasters occurring on Earth and see them on our phones, the notion that they are increasing is understandable. Most of the people I spoke with are alarmed and have adopted the narrative of global warming disaster looming and developing. Most, if not all, believe that we live in an unavoidable global looming disaster, one that we don't do enough to avoid. It is a hard notion to live with, as it is very alarming and simultaneously paralyzing, as there is little that can be done in the matter. A lot of social anger and general frustration is based on the belief held by people that other human beings are not doing enough to tackle this imminent issue that puts all of us in danger. Lucky us, this notion is wrong. Practically, the number of deaths from natural disasters has diminished drastically by over 90% in the last 80 years, and the total amount of natural disasters did not increase at an unprecedented pace if looking at the data for a long enough period. Regardless, the issue of global warming exists and should be addressed. However, the perception of it due to social media is unrealistic and destructive. It prevents us from having a mature conversation and doing what humans do best, finding new solutions to our problems. In recent years, a new term has been thrown around by the left liberals. They called it lived experience. While we can all have only a lived experience, the notion is worth considering. Eventually, these words are used by the youngest generation living in a digital world to express their personal overexposure to the worldview imposed on them on social media. In other words, what they are trying to say is that if taking into account only their emotional eyebrows, their exposure to terror is relentless and frightening. In many ways, it is a cry for help. Not one that should support everything they feel, but one that will assert their confusion and give them tools to overstep from the digital to the real world. We live in a world that is shaped not based on reality, but on what we perceive to be the virtual reality we are exposed to. The nature of this reality is scary and isolated. It is a worldview that pedestalizes crime, disasters, and misfortune to catch our eyeballs. The tragedy in all of it is that we didn't evolve sufficiently in the technological era to understand it. Life online is playing a vicious game against our well-being, both personally and socially. It pushes us into forming a worldview and a belief system that leaves us isolated, depressed, and anxious. The reality is that most people living on Earth are good people who wish to live a happy life surrounded by people to love and be loved. Most people want a need to be part of a society and aim for peace, justice, and the flourishing of their society. Unfortunately, most of the people currently hold terrible beliefs due to their lack of capacity to relate to the life they are living instead of the world they are digitally exposed to. A real need emerges in our society to address this topic and understand how to handle it correctly. Society is currently self-destructing due to thoughts and beliefs shaped by an algorithm that does not have our best interests at heart. Not because it is evil, but because he is indifferent. It is true that a small minority of bad people exist, that some disasters happen in the world, and that people are unnecessarily dying every day. But it is not by generalizing all of us to the lowest denominator of our kind, nor by terrorizing ourselves based on the margin that we will be able to have a serious and productive conversation about how to create a better future. If you like what you hear, please consider to like and subscribe. For more interesting conversations about complicated topics, check my channel or click the link for my website below. Thank you for sharing your time with us. We will cherish any comment or opinion, both positive and negative.